Welcome to The Critique. Today we're analyzing a 24-minute segment by C14, where Shlomo Peres discusses Israel-Iran tensions 2.5 years after October 7th.
Let's jump right into the feedback.
Starting immediately with structure and flow.
Effective interviewing requires managing a guest's analogies to ensure they clarify rather than dilute the strategic argument.
That's really the core issue here with how the guest uses storytelling.
Right. He leans so heavily into these extended metaphors.
Like that really long analogy about buying a rug from a Persian merchant?
Exactly. And then later there's that personal anecdote about a spy test involving his son in England.
Yeah, and the weakness here is that while these are colorful stories, they create a massive drag on the pacing.
They really do. They completely distance the listener from the actual urgent topic of nuclear threats and ballistic missiles.
Right, because the rug metaphor is supposed to explain the geography of Iran and hidden nuclear sites.
But it takes this incredibly long, winding road to reach a point that's actually, it's pretty simple.
Which is just that we don't know where everything is.
Right.
It felt like we were just hanging out in the bazaar for a long time just to establish that Iran has hidden assets.
Yeah. And the anecdote about the son in England where the 4-year-old opens the door and the Iranian man is asking for daddy, it's dramatic, but it doesn't connect.
It doesn't connect to a specific strategic insight about the current standoff, other than a general vibe of they are watching us.
Precisely. It disrupts the authority of the content.
Right.
When you're discussing the movement of U.S. aircraft carriers shifting into a folksy storytelling mode about haggling prices, de-escalates the tension.
It doesn't serve the narrative at all.
No, it makes the interview feel less like a strategic briefing and more like a casual chat.
Which totally undermines the gravity of the situation described in the intro.
So, looking at this through the lens of improvement, the suggestion is that the host needs to practice active steering.
Active steering. I like that.
Yeah, meaning you validate the metaphor briefly, but immediately pivot it back to hard data or strategic reality.
Before the guest just drifts off into full storytelling mode.
Exactly. You have to anticipate when a metaphor is becoming a monologue. Catch the ball and throw it back.
So how would that look in practice? Could you give a concrete example of how the host could have interjected during that rug analogy?
Absolutely. So when Peres starts talking about haggling the price of a rug from 1,000 down to 100.
Instead of letting him finish the transaction.
Right. The host should interject with something like, so if the rug represents the complex Iranian geography, are you saying their nuclear sites are the price they are hiding?
Oh, that's good.
And then follow up with, how does that specific negotiation tactic apply to the current enrichment levels we are seeing today?
Yeah, that forces the metaphor to actually do work immediately.
Exactly. It creates a bridge. It says, I hear your analogy, now apply it to the war.
It prevents the guest from getting lost in the memory of the rug merchant.
And keeps the pacing tight and respectful of the listener's time.
Which is essential. Moving on to our second critique, this focuses on core essence and engagement.
A strong interviewer must identify and probe contradictions between the guest's current assertions and the historical context established at the start of the show.
This stood out to me so much because the intro of this piece was just so powerful.
It really was.
It explicitly mentioned the failure and surprise of October 7th. The host literally says, no one prepared us.
Right. But then the weakness is that later in the interview, Peres makes a claim about absolute intelligence superiority regarding Iran.
He says, if they move from here to there at 1 p.m., we know it.
Implying this level of total omniscience. We see their steps.
And the host just accepts this.
Yes, the weakness is accepting this claim of omniscience without challenging it against the backdrop of the previous intelligence failure mentioned mere minutes earlier.
It leaves the listener with massive cognitive dissonance.
Exactly. The listener is thinking, wait a minute, you just told me we were blind 2 years ago, but now you're telling me we see everything?
If you don't ask that question, the audience loses trust.
It starts to feel like propaganda rather than analysis. The listener remembers the trauma of the failure vividly.
So when they hear, we know everything, their bullshit detector just goes off.
Right. The host has to be the one to voice that skepticism. So the suggestion here is to use the intro's context to test the guest's confidence.
Use that tension to create a more dynamic discussion.
You don't have to be aggressive, but you have to be the proxy for the skeptical listener.
So what is a concrete example of doing that without sounding disrespectful to the guest's expertise?
You frame it as a query about evolution. When Peres says, we know the steps of the Iranian leadership, the host should jump in and say, Shlomo, you mentioned earlier we were asleep on October 7th.
Right, bring it back to the intro.
And then ask, what specific technological or structural changes have happened in the last 2 years that give us this level of confidence now that we didn't have then?
That is excellent because it challenges the guest to provide actual evidence.
It forces them to explain the fix. Or if you want to push even harder, you could ask, is there a risk that this confidence in seeing their movements mirrors the confidence we had before the last war?
That elevates the conversation entirely. It turns a standard talking point into genuine analysis.
And honestly, if the guest can answer that question well, their credibility skyrockets.
Exactly. Okay, let's shift to the third critique, focusing on significance and relevance, or the so what factor. Strategic analysis interviews should aim to uncover defined end states rather than settling for open-ended ambiguity.
I noticed a lot of discussion about waiting in this segment.
Yeah, Perez talks about the Iranians stalling and dragging Trump by the nose.
And Israel preparing.
But the weakness is that the conversation just circles the drain on why the wait benefits Israel.
Other than a generic, we need more preparation, the conclusion leads to a very passive wait and hope for the best sentiment.
There's all that talk about the Purim guys and chocolate trucks intended to distract,
which completely muddies the waters regarding the actual strategic trigger for war. We spend time on whether the chocolate is a trick.
but we don't spend time defining what actually starts the shooting.
Correct. The listener is left with everyone is waiting. But why? And until when?
It feels like we're observing the situation rather than analyzing the mechanics of the tipping point.
So the suggestion is that the host needs to drive the guest toward defining that tipping point.
Move away from who benefits from the stalling and toward what ends the stalling.
Precisely. Ask about specific thresholds that would force the action discussed. In geopolitical strategy, ambiguity is the enemy of insight. We need to know the red lines.
Can you give us a concrete example of a question that achieves that?
Sure. Instead of a broad question about the U.S. fleet the host should ask, you mentioned the U.S. fleet is here for deterrence and Trump calls it hell.
Right.
What is the specific red line event beyond general enrichment that shifts the U.S. from a deterrent posture to an active combatant?
Is it the closing of the Strait of Hormuz or a specific casualty count in Israel?
Exactly. By asking about the Strait of Hormuz or a casualty count, you force the guest to commit to a scenario.
It moves the conversation from abstract tensions to concrete consequences.
It transforms the interview from a weather report,
Like saying it's cloudy?
right, to a forecast. If the pressure drops to X, it will storm.
That is a perfect analogy. Listeners invested in this topic want the forked.
They want to know the conditions that change the reality.
That brings us to our fourth and final critique regarding angle and originality, specifically on the discussion of technology.
When discussing modern warfare technology, the conversation needs to move beyond surface-level comparisons to provide genuine insight into tactical advantages.
In the interview, Perez discusses the shift from manned aircraft to UAVs and cyber warfare.
Right, and he compares the cost of a UAV to an F-35.
The weakness here is that this is a fairly standard, almost Wikipedia-level analysis.
Most listeners of a dense briefing show already know a drone is cheaper than an F-35. That's not news.
And saying a cyber offensive achieves results like a tank barrel, it's a strong image, but it remains in generality.
It doesn't explain how these specific tools solve the Iranian geography problem mentioned earlier.
It feels totally disconnected. We have the rug problem, the hidden sites in the mountains, and the drone solution. But the bridge between them isn't built.
Exactly. We don't see how the tool fits the job. So the suggestion is to push the expert to connect the specific technology to the specific challenge of the Iranian theater.
Rather than just listing assets.
Right. We know we have cyber capabilities. The question is, how do those tools dismantle the specific Iranian threat described?
So how does the host push for that depth?
You have to ask for the how, not the what. Interrupt the comparison and ask for the application.
For example,
When Perez mentioned cyber capabilities, the host could ask, you mentioned we can't physically destroy the entire Iranian regime because of the terrain.
right.
Can you explain how offensive cyber specifically disrupts their ballistic missile supply chain without a kinetic strike? Give us a scenario of what that looks like.
That is a much richer question. It forces a visualization of the conflict.
It forces the expert to illustrate the tactical reality.
Instead of just saying cyber is powerful, he has to explain cyber can disrupt the centrifuge's ability to spin.
Or cyber can scramble the launch codes, effectively freezing the battery.
It turns a generic tech list into a strategic roadmap.
It respects the listener's intelligence by assuming they want to know the mechanics, not just the inventory.
And it ties back beautifully to the earlier points about the difficulty of the Iranian terrain.
If you can't bomb every mountain, how does cyber reach inside the mountain?
The host let the guest list ingredients without explaining the recipe.
And for an audience that follows the topic, the recipe is the interesting part.
This has been a very productive breakdown. Let's recap the main theme.
First, regarding structure and flow, rein in extended metaphor. The host needs to actively steer analogies like the Ruck story back to the strategic topic immediately.
Second, regarding core essence, actively challenge intelligence confidence. Use the context of your own intro to create dynamic tension and ask what changed.
Third, regarding significance, push for specific strategic redline. Ask what specific event triggers the war rather than just discussing the atmosphere waiting.
And finally, regarding angle and originality, deepen the technical discussion. Demand to know how tools like cyber achieve specific strategic goals against the terrain.
The guest clearly has deep expertise, but the host's job is to mine that expertise for diamonds, not just let it flow like a river.
You have to pan for the gold, sift through the stories, and polish the actual strategic nuggets.
Exactly.
We invite you to submit the next iteration of your show for further review.
We'd love to see how you implement these suggestions.
Thank you for listening to The Critique.